Walk into a JB Hi-Fi today and really let the experience wash over you. It's a calculated assault on the senses. The floors are usually scuffed linoleum that hasn't seen a buffer since the mid-2000s. The ceiling's an exposed industrial grid of pipes and ducts painted a dark, gloomy charcoal, and everywhere you look, you're being screamed at by aggressive, handwritten signs on yellow cardboard. To the untrained eye, it looks like chaos. A business that's about to go under and is frantically trying to liquidate its stock before the bailiffs arrive. But that aesthetic is of course a lie. In fact, it's one of the most sophisticated psychological tricks in modern retail. That garage sale vibe is engineered to bypass your brain's price-checking defenses. It makes you feel like a shark hunting for a deal in a warehouse. Now, hold that image in your mind, get in your car, drive 5 minutes down the road to the local homemaker center, and walk into the Good Guys. Everything is bright and white. The lighting is harsh and clinical, designed to reflect off the polished surfaces of stainless steel fridges and enamel washing machines. The aisles are wide and orderly. The products stand in regimented rows like soldiers on parade. The staff wear sensible button-up shirts and trousers, fully prepared to discuss spin cycles and energy ratings. Even the air feels sterilized, carrying that distinct scent of ozone and factory-fresh plastic. Nobody walks into this store just for the fun of it, or to casually browse. You're here because your fridge just died and the groceries are spoiling, or the washing machine decided to flood the laundry room. It's the definition of a grudge purchase. That painful moment when you're forced to drop $1,000 on a white metal box that you essentially resent having to buy. These two retailers are from different planets. One's the rebellious teenager of Australian retail, built on impulse buys and pop culture, while the other is the sensible, boring parent built on necessity and reliability. If you were an analyst in 2016, staring at spreadsheets and a glass tower in Sydney, the idea of merging these two companies sounded like a recipe for disaster. The skeptics said the customer bases were too different and that the operational models were incompatible. They said JB Hi-Fi, a company famous for selling CDs and DVDs, had absolutely no business trying to sell high-end German dishwashers to suburban families. Looking back, the skeptics were spectacularly wrong. The deal effectively created a monopoly, handing JB Hi-Fi a fortress that secured their dominance over the sector. It's now a two-headed monster ruling the Australian home, capturing your wallet regardless of whether you're buying a PlayStation or a vacuum cleaner. This is the story of the acquisition that changed everything. This is how JB Hi-Fi turned the Good Guys into a cash machine. JB Hi-Fi's business model had been built on a river of gold called physical media. CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, video games and such. These were the perfect retail products. Small, easy to ship, high margin, and crucially, they drove frequency. Customers would come into the store every single week to see what was new. You'd walk in to buy the new Red Hot Chili Peppers album or the latest season of How I Met Your Mother on DVD, and while you were there, you might accidentally buy a new set of headphones or a car stereo. By 2015, Silicon Valley had effectively arrived to slaughter the golden goose. Netflix was turning DVD players into fossils overnight. Spotify had begun evaporating the CD market, destroying the high-margin impulse purchases that used to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, Steam and digital storefronts were quietly cannibalizing video game sales, training an entire generation in the fact that they didn't need a physical disc to play the latest blockbuster. Executives found themselves staring down the barrel of an existential crisis that looked suspiciously like the death spiral of blockbuster video. JB Hi-Fi needed to pivot, and they needed to do it fast. They'd already started experimenting with appliances. They launched JB Hi-Fi Home trial stores where they shoved toasters, kettles, and vacuums onto shelves where the DVD racks used to be. But it was a slow, painful grind. Converting existing stores required capital and time, two things they were running out of. Enter the Good Guys.
The Good Guys. Pay less, pay cash.
The Good Guys was founded by the Mir family in the 1950s. It had exploded from a single shop in suburban Melbourne into a billion-dollar giant that operated on a wavelength completely alien to the standard corporate playbook. The Good Guys became a retail icon through a mix of relentless advertising and hard-nosed economics. you had this jingle.
Come in and see the good guys. Pay cash and we'll slash the prices. Come in and see the good guys. We'll give you a good price.
Backing that up was the pay less, pay cash philosophy, a mantra that defined the entire business. That cult-like energy was fueled by a unique joint venture system. More often than not, the person running your local store was a legitimate part owner who had staked his own capital to buy parentage of the inventory, giving him a level of financial skin in the game that you simply don't see in modern retail. The structure created a fleet of absolute hustlers. Because it was their own money on the line, these owner-operators were aggressive. They were on the floor every single day and had the autonomy to negotiate prices. If you walked in and said, "I'll give you $50 less if I pay cash," the owner could look at you, do the mental math on his margin, and say, "Done." This created a unique shopping experience, a bazaar-like atmosphere where deals were done with a handshake. It built immense loyalty with the older demographic who loved the feeling of winning a negotiation. But by 2016, the Mir family saw the writing on the wall. The patriarch, Andrew Mir, knew that Amazon was coming and the digital shift was accelerating. He decided it was time to secure the family fortune, and the family began preparing to float the company on the Australian Stock Exchange. This terrified the executives at JB Hi-Fi. You see, the IPO would give the Mir family a massive payday, but it would also flood the good guys with fresh investor capital, transforming them from a private family business into a public juggernaut with a massive war chest, ready to expand aggressively. JB's CEO, Richard Murray, realized he was at a crossroads. He could spend the next 10 years fighting a bloody war against a reinvigorated, cash-rich rival, or he could do something audacious. He could buy them. Murray chose the latter. He decided to eliminate the threat by absorbing it, effectively betting his career and the company's future on one massive play. But buying peace in the retail sector is expensive, and the cost of this particular truce was astronomical. The final bill came to a staggering $870 million. JB had to launch a massive capital raise, going cap in hand to their shareholders to ask for $394 million more in new equity. They went to the banks for the rest, acquiring nearly $500 million in new debt. The financial press was skeptical. Headlines asked if JB Hi-Fi had bitten off more than it could chew. Analysts pointed out the vast cultural chasm between the rock and roll vibe of JB and the family-friendly vibe of the good guys. They warned that trying to merge these two distinct tribes would be a disaster. Murray and his team ignored the surface-level noise and focused entirely on the back end. They understood that modern retail is a game of logistics, defined strictly by the speed and cost of moving boxes. By combining the buying power of the two biggest electronics retailers in the country, they realized they were building an engine of pure efficiency that would become effectively unstoppable. The deal closed in November 2016, and then the ruthlessness began. The first casualty was the unique culture of the good guys. JB Hi-Fi knew that the joint venture model, while great for hustle, was a nightmare for efficiency. You can't run a modern, data-driven logistics network when you have to ask permission from 100 different petty kings who all run their stores differently. You can't harmonize pricing and also can't centralize inventory. JB Hi-Fi ruthlessly dismantled the system, buying out the minority stakes and converting those proud, independent owner-operators into standard corporate managers. They effectively swapped their autonomy for a rulebook and a uniform, handing down a strict directive from the head office that centralized pricing was the new law and that the days of haggling were officially over. This was a violent cultural reset. The good guys' joint venture model basically meant every store owner ran their own show. JB Hi-Fi is the total opposite. They might look like chaotic punks to the customer, but their back end is ruthless, centralized corporate efficiency. When they took over, they imposed this yellow and black operating system, wiping out the owner-operator freedom and replacing the handshake deal with the unbending will of head office. This sudden shock to the system had immediate consequences. As the old owners departed and the new rules took hold, the business momentarily stuttered and sales took a hit. The financial media, always eager for a disaster story, immediately started whispering that the acquisition was failing and that the culture clash was fatal. But JB Hi-Fi held the line. They were playing a longer game, ignoring the short-term noise to focus entirely on fixing the issues. They immediately began merging the supply chains to eliminate a glaring inefficiency. Before the acquisition, you literally had trucks from JB Hi-Fi and trucks from the Good Guys driving past each other, carrying the exact same Samsung TV to the exact same suburb. To stop this colossal waste of fuel and wages, JB Hi-Fi consolidated the networks into massive home delivery centers, giant centralized warehouses that now act as the beating heart for both brands. While the logistics team was fixing the trucks, the finance team was fighting another war in the meeting rooms. To understand this, you have to understand the power dynamics of retail. Imagine you're a sales director for a major manufacturer like Samsung, LG, or Sony. Your job is to sell TVs to Australian retailers. Before 2016, you had a pretty good life, with two major customers, JB Hi-Fi and the Good Guys. This was a competitive tension you could exploit. If JB Hi-Fi demanded a lower wholesale price, you could threaten to give an exclusive model to the Good Guys. If the Good Guys demanded a higher marketing rebate, you could shift stock to JB Hi-Fi. You had the leverage. Then, overnight, that disappeared. Suddenly, you're walking into a meeting room to negotiate with a single entity that controls nearly 30% of the entire Australian market for appliances and consumer electronics. In some categories, like premium TVs, their market share is even higher. If you want to sell your products in Australia, you have to be on their shelves. JB Hi-Fi used this new power with absolute ruthlessness. They sat down with every supplier and demanded a harmonization of terms. Effectively, they said, we want the best price you gave JB and the best price you gave the Good Guys, and then we want a discount on top of that because we're buying so much. In the first full year of ownership, JB Hi-Fi reported around $20 million in, quote, synergy benefits, which is just corporate code for money we extracted from our suppliers. That's $20 million of pure profit that fell straight to the bottom line without them having to sell a single extra toaster because JB was now big enough to demand it. By 2019, the machine was fully operational with costs cut and integration complete, but it was running into the headwinds of a sluggish economy and the looming threat of Amazon Australia's launch. Just as the analysts were predicting that Bezos would crush the local market, the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020 completely flipped the script. What was an absolute apocalypse for the retail and hospitality industries became, ironically, the greatest economic windfall in the history of JB Hi-Fi and the Good Guys. People couldn't travel, couldn't eat out, and they couldn't go to concerts. All the while, the government pumped billions of dollars of stimulus money into the economy with JobKeeper, JobSeeker, and cash handouts. People were stuck at home, bored, anxious, and flush with cash. So they nested. First came the work from home wave. Everyone needed a new monitor, a better webcam, and a new laptop for Zoom calls. JB Hi-Fi's inventory was wiped out in weeks. Then came the boredom wave. People needed entertainment. They bought massive TVs, gaming consoles, bread makers, and coffee machines. Then came the renovation wave. Staring at their four walls, people decided to upgrade their kitchens and laundries. The Good Guys saw sales go vertical. In the 2021 financial year, the group's sales rocketed to $8.9 billion. Net profit exploded to over $500 million. It was a frenzy. Crucially, while Amazon struggled to ship items from massive centralized warehouses that were plagued by outbreaks and delays, JB and the Good Guys used their store network, turning their over 300 stores across the country into mini distribution centers. If you ordered a toaster online, it wasn't shipped from a warehouse in Sydney, it was shipped from the Good Guys store 3 suburbs away. You could even click and collect in the parking lot within an hour. However, the pressure to maximize revenue led the Good Guys into dangerous territory. We need to talk about store cash. When you buy a fridge, for example, the store will give you, say, $100 in store cash to use on your next purchase. It's a classic loyalty loop designed to bring you back into the store to buy a blender or a vacuum. But the Good Guys dialed this strategy up to 11. They started running promotions where the terms and conditions were, let's just say, a little murky. They offered store cash that expired in ridiculously short timeframes, sometimes just a week or less. In the retail industry, this is called breakage. Breakage is the percentage of gift cards or credits that are never redeemed. Retailers, of course, love breakage. It's free money. If I sell you a fridge for $1,000 and give you a $100 credit, but you never use it, I effectively kept that $100 as pure profit. The good guys engineered a system designed to maximize breakage. They relied on the fact that people are busy, forgetful, and easily distracted. They were spamming customers with text messages, creating a false sense of urgency, and burying the expiration dates in the fine print. It was aggressive and, as it turns out, illegal. The ACCC, Australia's consumer watchdog, stepped in. They launched a massive investigation into the promotions running between 2019 and 2023 and found that the good guys had misled customers about how the credits worked. They found that in some cases, people had to opt in to marketing emails just to get the credit they were promised, a condition that wasn't clearly disclosed. As a result, in 2024, the good guys agreed to pay a $13.5 million penalty, which, for a company making $500 million in profit a year, is just the cost of doing business.
The Good Guys has been ordered to pay $13.5 million after the federal court found it misled customers through 116 store credit promotions between 2019 and 2023.
They wrote the check, issued a standard "we're sorry" press release, and moved on. The share price barely blinked. So, is the war won? Well, not exactly. The retail landscape is shifting yet again, and the shadow of Amazon still looms large. The American giant is getting faster, pricing more aggressively, and building a logistics network that rivals Australia Post. Simultaneously, pure play online retailers like Kogan and Temple & Webster are chipping away at the edges, offloading white label electronics and furniture without the crushing overhead of 300 physical leases. JB Hi-Fi's greatest asset is customers still feeling the need to physically open the oven door or judge the clarity of an OLED panel before handing over their credit card, something that Amazon simply cannot replicate. The story of JB Hi-Fi and the Good Guys is a masterclass in strategy, timing, and execution. They bought the right asset at the right price at the exact moment their old business model was dying. They took two very different cultures and bound them together with a back end of steel. They respected the brand differences but unified the operations. But what do you think? Do you miss the old days of actually haggling with the store owner at the Good Guys, or are you happy to just grab a box and get out? Did you get caught up in the pandemic frenzy and buy a bread maker you haven't touched since 2021? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the retail wars, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.